Welcome to another deep dive, this time into something that I think is really relevant for anyone who has ever learned anything, particularly in higher education.
Yeah.
It's about how we study and learn,
Right.
and maybe even more importantly, or at least as importantly, how researchers try to understand that process using questionnaires.
That's right.
And we have a fantastic source for this deep dive. It's John T.E. Richardson's work that really goes into the strengths and weaknesses of these tools, which are,
Right.
yeah, super commonly used.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great place to start because if we want to improve how we teach people, we need to have a good grasp of how they actually approach learning in the first place.
Right.
And questionnaires have been used for ages to try and get at this.
Yeah.
So what we're going to explore today is really whether they're giving us a clear and valid picture of what's going on and what it means if they're not.
Yeah, and I think it's important to emphasize this isn't just some kind of esoteric academic debate, right?
Right.
This actually affects everyone. I mean, understanding how learning is studied has a ripple effect. It
Right.
impacts the way teachers teach and even how we as lifelong learners approach new information.
Right. Yeah.
So think of this as getting kind of an inside look into how learning itself is understood.
Yeah, and I think to ground our discussion, we should highlight these two really influential questionnaires
Okay.
that emerged in the 1980s.
Okay.
One is the approaches to studying inventory,
Okay.
or ASI for short, which was
Yeah.
developed by Ramsden and Entwistle. And the other is the Study Process Questionnaire,
Got it.
or SPQ, developed by Biggs.
Yeah.
These have really been fundamental to the way we think about student learning for decades.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really understand these questionnaires,
Yes.
to see how reliable they are, and what the challenges are in using them to understand how students learn.
Right.
So where should we begin?
Well, a natural starting point, I think, is with reliability. When we talk about reliability in research, we essentially mean that if you use the same tool over and over again, under the same conditions, you would expect to get the same results.
Yeah.
Like think of a tape measure.
Yeah.
If you measure the same table twice,
Right.
you expect to get the same length each time, right?
Absolutely.
So how consistent are the results we get from these learning questionnaires? Well, one way to measure that is to look at what's called internal consistency,
Okay.
which often uses a statistic called Cronbach's alpha.
Okay.
Essentially, this tells us how well the different questions or items within a specific part of the questionnaire
Right.
are all measuring the same underlying thing.
Got it.
So for the ASI and the SPQ internal consistency for their scales actually varies quite a bit.
Okay.
It ranges from about zero point 0.2
Okay.
up to 0.8.
So that's a pretty huge range.
Yeah.
What does that tell us?
Well, it tells us a few things. First, just as a reminder, generally anything below a Cronbach's alpha of 0.6
Okay.
is usually considered to be pretty poor.
Oh,
Okay, by conventional psychometric standards.
You okay?
And when we're dealing with something as complex as cognitive processes, we often want to see even more stringent standards met.
Right, because it's not like measuring a table.
Exactly. It's much more nuanced.
Yeah.
So what this is telling us is that some parts of these questionnaires
Right.
seem to be quite unreliable.
Okay.
And so we can't really have full confidence in all of the results.
Oh, some parts are okay.
Yeah, some parts are okay, but others are not so good.
Got it. Okay, so internal consistency tells us about how reliable different parts of the questionnaire are.
Yeah.
But what about if someone takes the same questionnaire at different times?
Right.
Would their scores be similar?
That's where what we call test-retest reliability comes in.
Okay.
So researchers have looked at how stable scores on these questionnaires are
Yeah.
over different periods of time.
Okay.
And for shorter periods, say up to about 3 months,
Right.
the test-retest reliability scores for the ASI and the SPQ scales tend to be between 0.5 and 0.8,
Okay.
which generally is considered to be acceptable.
Okay. So if I fill out one of these questionnaires now,
Right.
and then I do it again in 2 months,
Yeah,
my answers are likely to be pretty similar.
that's right.
Okay, but what about over longer periods?
So over longer periods of time, like around a year or so,
Mm-hmm.
the retest reliability tends to drop a bit
Okay.
to between 0.42 and 0.64.
Got it.
Now, this still suggests some level of stability,
Okay.
but it becomes a bit harder to interpret.
Why is there more variability over those longer periods?
Well, over a year, students experience all sorts of things, right? They
Right.
take different courses,
Yeah.
they have different challenges and successes,
Right.
their personal lives change, and all of these things can genuinely influence how they study.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if their scores change over a year,
Right.
It's hard to say for certain whether it's because the questionnaire itself isn't perfectly reliable
Right.
or because their actual study habits have genuinely evolved.
Yeah. So life gets in the way,
Exactly.
and that makes it difficult to tease apart.
That's right.
And I imagine it's also just difficult to actually track the same students
Right.
over such a long period.
Yeah, absolutely. Longitudinal studies,
Right.
which try to track people over time, face big hurdles.
Okay.
A major one is attrition, which basically means that students drop out of the study.
Right. They get bored with it.
Yeah, or maybe they leave university or something.
Yeah.
And that means that the group you're able to follow up with might not be really representative
Right.
of the original group you started with,
Yeah. That makes sense.
which can skew the results.
So reliability has its strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary.
Now let's talk about validity.
Okay.
And first up is construct validity.
Right.
What is that?
So construct validity basically means whether a questionnaire
Right.
is actually measuring the thing that it claims to be measuring.
Right.
So for instance, if a section of the questionnaire is
yeah.
designed to measure deep learning, is it actually capturing that idea effectively?
Right. So it's actually measuring what it's supposed to.
Yeah, that's the basic idea.
Okay. So how do researchers typically investigate this?
Well, the main technique is factor analysis.
Okay.
It's a statistical method that looks at how all the individual questions
Yeah.
within a questionnaire tend to group together.
Okay.
Ideally, the results of the factor analysis would confirm the specific groupings or scales that the questionnaire was designed to measure.
Okay.
However,
Yeah.
for both the ASI and the SPQ,
Yeah.
analyses of the individual questions
Right.
have produced what the research describes as
Oh.
generally unsatisfactory results.
So that doesn't sound good.
It doesn't, and what this means is that
Yeah.
quite often some of the intended scales are identified, but not all of them.
Okay. So if it was meant to measure 5 things,
Right.
it's really only measuring 3.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this has led to a few researchers developing sort of modified and shorter versions of
Right.
these questionnaires.
So cut out the bad parts.
Yeah. Essentially, try to improve their construct validity by focusing on the parts that seem to be more clearly defined.
Yeah.
Shorter questionnaires are also just more practical.
Right. Less work for the students.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we've talked about the individual scales.
Yeah.
Now, what about the broader structure?
Right.
The idea that these scales are supposed to come together to represent larger approaches to learning.
Yeah, that's really important.
So does that work?
So the ASI, for example, has 16 scales,
Okay.
which are meant to define 4 overarching study orientations.
Okay.
Things like focusing on understanding meaning
Yeah.
or being driven by achievement.
Right.
And the SPQ has 6 scales that are intended to represent 3 main approaches.
Got it.
Surface deep
Yeah.
at achieving.
Okay.
So researchers have used factor analysis on these scale scores to see if the data actually supports this intended structure.
Okay.
And unfortunately, the findings from these analyses are described as disappointing.
So again, not good. It's not so good. So the way these questionnaires are organized into those bigger ideas isn't really being borne out by the data.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so construct validity has some real issues.
Yeah.
Let's move on to convergent validity.
Right.
What is that?
So convergent validity basically looks at whether different questionnaires that are designed to measure similar things actually do relate to each other.
Okay.
So imagine you have 2 questionnaires,
Right.
both aiming to measure something like deep engagement with learning.
Right.
If they're both truly measuring the same thing,
Yeah.
you'd expect students who score high on one to also score high on the other.
Makes sense.
It's about looking for agreement between different ways of measuring the same thing.
So are there other questionnaires out there that are trying to get at similar things as the ASI and the SPQ?
Yes, there's actually been quite a lot of conceptual overlap in this area.
Okay.
For example, the distinction between a deep approach versus a surface approach,
Right.
or a meaning orientation versus a reproducing orientation,
Yeah.
shows up in many different questionnaires,
Okay.
even those developed in different countries and higher education systems.
So maybe this deep versus surface idea is something that really resonates across different contexts.
It suggests that maybe there were some really fundamental ways
Yeah.
in which students approach learning.
That makes sense. But just because the ideas are similar doesn't necessarily mean that the tools actually agree in practice.
Exactly.
So what does the research show about how different questionnaires actually relate to each other?
So there have been a number of studies that have investigated this.
Okay.
Back in 1979,
Yeah.
Ribish and Schmeck looked at the relationship between an earlier version of the SPQ,
Okay.
called the Study Behavior Questionnaire,
Got it.
and another questionnaire called the Inventory of Learning Processes, or ILP.
Okay.
They found a moderate amount of shared variance between these two,
Okay.
which suggests some convergence,
Okay.
but they also found much less overlap with another instrument called Kolb's Learning Style Inventory.
So some questionnaires seem to align to some extent,
Yeah,
but maybe others that look at different aspects of learning don't.
exactly.
Okay.
And this pattern's been found in other research as well.
Okay.
So, for example, there's generally been pretty limited overlap found
Yeah.
between approaches to studying questionnaires like the ASI and the SPQ
Right.
and instruments designed to measure Kolb's learning styles.
Okay.
Schmeck himself, in an unpublished study in 1988, found only modest relationships
Okay.
between the scales of the ASI and the ILP.
Okay.
But later research by Cano Garcia and Justicia
Okay.
did find somewhat clearer relationships between the ASI and the ILP.
It's a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, it's inconsistent.
Sometimes there's agreement between different measures and sometimes there isn't.
That's right.
Okay.
And when researchers have used shorter versions of these questionnaires or just selected specific questions from them,
Okay.
they've generally found at least some associations,
Okay.
which does provide some limited support for convergent validity
Right.
at a broad level.
Okay.
However, this often comes with only mixed support
Okay.
for the more detailed structure of the questionnaires.
Right. So again, we're seeing that weaker construct validity popping up.
Right, so we might be tapping into the same general ideas,
Yeah.
but the specific way each questionnaire tries to break down those ideas
Right.
might not be lining up so well.
Got it. Okay, so that's convergent validity.
Yeah,
Now, are there other types of validity that we should consider?
there are.
Okay.
So another way to think about validity is to see whether questionnaires can differentiate between different groups of students
Okay.
who we would expect to differ
Right.
in terms of their learning approaches.
Makes sense.
So, for example,
Yeah.
there's pretty consistent evidence that ASI scores actually do vary with age.
Okay.
Older students compared to younger students
Yeah.
tend to score higher on measures of deep approach and a focus on understanding meaning.
Right. So they want to get at the why.
Yeah, and they tend to score lower on surface approach.
Yeah.
And a focus on just reproducing information.
So maybe as you get more experience as a student,
Right.
you kind of develop better learning strategies.
Yeah, perhaps.
Okay. And is there any other evidence that scores vary in predictable ways?
There's also some suggestive evidence
Yeah.
that scores can differ depending on things like students' prior academic qualifications,
Okay.
their subject of study,
Right.
and their level of study.
Right. So someone who's doing a PhD in engineering is probably going to have a different approach than,
You would think so.
yeah, a first-year student in literature.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But you did mention earlier a word of caution about this kind of evidence.
Yes, it's important to remember
Okay.
that a lot of these studies involve huge numbers of students.
All right.
And that means that even very small, practically insignificant differences
Yeah.
can end up being statistically significant.
Just because of the numbers? So
Yeah.
you might have a statistically significant finding that doesn't actually mean anything.
That's right.
Okay.
So it's really crucial
Yeah.
that researchers report effect sizes,
Okay.
which tell us about the magnitude of the differences.
Right. How big are these differences, really?
Exactly.
Okay.
Another interesting question is whether these questionnaires can actually identify subgroups of students with distinct learning styles.
Okay.
So Richardson in 1997
Yeah.
used cluster analysis on ASI scores,
Okay.
and he actually did find evidence for different subgroups of students.
Okay.
Some oriented more towards meaning
Right.
and some more towards reproducing information.
So maybe these questionnaires can be used to categorize different types of learners?
Potentially.
Okay.
And there's also been research showing that scores on these questionnaires can actually change after students have participated in certain educational programs.
Okay.
So Hamilton and colleagues in 1998
Okay.
used a short version of the ASI,
Okay.
and they found that students in a course that used a particular kind of teaching method
Yeah.
showed higher scores on meaning orientation after the course compared to students in a more traditionally taught course.
So maybe the way you're taught can actually change your learning approach.
That's what the data suggests.
Okay, that's really interesting. Now, what about the relationship between these scores and students' actual academic outcomes?
Right.
That seems really important.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what we call criterion-related validity.
Okay.
how well do these questionnaires actually correlate with things that matter?
Yeah, do they mean anything?
Right.
No.
So Ramsden and Entwistle, way back in 1981,
Yeah.
showed that there were correlations
Okay.
between ASI scores
Yeah.
and students' self-ratings
Okay.
of their academic progress.
Okay.
But as we've already talked about,
Yeah.
self-ratings can be a little bit unreliable.
Right.
Because students might overestimate
Yeah.
or underestimate how well they're actually doing.
Right, for all sorts of reasons.
Exactly. However,
Yeah.
there's actually pretty strong evidence
Yep.
for a correlation between scores on the ASI and students' subsequent academic performance.
So if you use a deeper approach,
Yeah, broadly speaking.
you're more likely to get better grades.
That's what the research suggests.
Okay.
And this actually not only supports the criterion-related validity,
Right.
but it can also be seen as further support for the construct validity of the ASI.
Okay.
If it's measuring something real and important about learning,
Right.
then it should be able to predict academic outcomes.
Right. It should actually be able to say something about how well you do.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, you were saying something about academically unsuccessful students
Yeah.
and what these questionnaires tell us about them.
So this is really interesting.
Yeah.
Several studies have found
Yeah.
that academically unsuccessful students don't just report using poorer approaches to studying.
Right.
They often don't actually show any consistent or coherent approach at all.
So it's not that they're using surface approaches effectively.
Right.
It's that their learning strategies are just all over the place.
It seems to be more of a lack of a clear approach
Right.
rather than simply having the wrong approach.
That's a really interesting distinction.
It is.
Okay, so we've covered reliability.
Wow.
We've covered validity.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about how these questionnaires are put together and whether they're actually appropriate for today's students and higher ed landscape,
Right.
which is probably very different than when these things were originally created.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this brings us to what's called content validity,
Okay.
which means whether the questionnaire adequately covers the relevant content
Right.
for the specific situation in which it's being used.
Got it.
As Richardson points out,
Yeah.
content validity is context dependent.
Okay.
What's valid in one setting might not be valid in another.
Right.
So this leads to the question of what he calls portability.
Okay.
How suitable are these questionnaires
Right.
for different national higher education systems?
Right, because the ASI and the SPQ both came out in the 1970s. So higher ed has changed a lot since then.
Oh, it's changed massively.
Yeah, I mean, just the student body itself.
It's more diverse now.
Yeah, much more diverse in terms of age,
Right.
social background,
Yeah.
cultural background,
Yeah.
ethnicity,
Yeah.
and even the way we communicate in academic settings
Right.
has become much less formal.
Yeah. Everything's much more casual these days.
Yeah.
So it seems like the language in these questionnaires might not resonate
Right.
with today's students.
Yeah, and even some of the underlying assumptions
Yeah.
might not be relevant anymore.
Right. Like a lot of the questions
Yeah.
might be worded in a way that's just way too wordy
Yeah,
or assumes a certain understanding of higher ed
absolutely.
that might have been present in the 1970s,
Right,
but isn't necessarily now.
exactly. And this can affect
Yeah.
how valid the questionnaires are.
Right. If students are interpreting the questions differently
Right.
than intended. Yeah.
And I know you've done some research with deaf students,
Right.
and that kind of highlighted this issue.
Yeah. So in our work with students who are deaf or hard of hearing,
Yeah.
we actually had to rephrase many of the original questions in the ASI
Wow.
to ensure that they were clear and relevant for that group.
Okay.
And
Wow.
this just really highlights the need
Right.
to validate questionnaires
Right.
for each new group or context in which they're used.
Makes sense. So it seems like even if the basic ideas,
Yeah.
like deep and surface learning, are kind of universal,
Yeah.
the way you ask about them
Right.
might need to be adapted.
Absolutely. And while those general distinctions,
Mhm.
like deep surface and meaning producing,
Yeah.
do seem to appear across different higher education systems,
Right.
how they're interpreted
Yeah.
can vary a lot depending on the culture.
And we're not just talking about national culture, are we?
No, we're
Yeah.
talking about any kind of shared context.
Yeah. Like even within a country, you could have different cultures.
Absolutely. Like students on access courses might interpret things differently.
Yeah.
Or, as we said, the deaf community.
Right.
And so this lack of portability
Yeah.
can really limit how widely we can apply the findings.
If you develop a questionnaire in one context,
Right.
it might not be valid in a different one.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's content validity and portability.
Yeah.
Now, there's one more thing about the construction of these questionnaires that we haven't touched on,
Okay.
which is the issue of response bias.
Yes, that's right.
What is response bias?
So in both the ASI and the SPQ, almost all of the questions within a single scale are phrased in the same direction.
Okay.
For example, all of the questions in the deep approach section
Yeah.
might be worded positively.
Okay.
So it makes it really difficult to tell if
Yeah.
someone is genuinely reporting a tendency towards deep learning
Right.
or if they just have a general tendency to agree with positive statements.
They just like saying yes.
Yeah, essentially.
Eh.
Only 2 of the 16 scales on the ASI even include reverse-scored items,
Okay.
which are a way of trying to detect this.
Okay.
In contrast, Schmeck's inventory of learning processes
Hmm.
deliberately included both positively and negatively worded items
Okay.
within each scale.
So as to avoid this,
Yeah, to try and control for that.
so someone could get a high score on deep learning
Yeah,
just because they like to say yes to everything
potentially.
rather than because they actually learn that way.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's response bias, and
Yes.
it's a potential problem.
Yeah, it's definitely something that researchers need to be much more aware of.
Right. Okay, so we've looked at reliability.
Yeah.
We've looked at different aspects of validity.
Yeah.
We've talked about the construction and the portability of these questionnaires.
Yes.
Now let's get to what is perhaps the biggest question of all,
Okay.
which is how valid are self-reports in the first place?
That's right.
Can students really tell us about their own learning processes and tendencies?
That's the fundamental assumption underlying all of these questionnaires.
Right.
They assume that people can provide accurate and valid reports of their own predispositions to learn in certain ways.
Right.
But research on self-reports of mental processes in general
Yeah.
raises some pretty serious doubts about this.
Okay, so let's get into that.
Okay.
What does that research suggest?
So if we think back to some of that early research on student learning,
Okay.
it often involved interviews
Okay.
where students would be asked about how they had just approached a specific task.
Right, like reading a passage or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
In those situations, the reports that the students gave
Yeah.
were based on their relatively recent memory
Right.
of the cognitive processes that they had used,
Yeah.
which makes them generally more reliable.
Right.
But questionnaires ask for broader retrospective accounts.
Right. It's like, how do you usually do things?
Exactly.
Not, how did you do this one thing?
Right. And it's really unlikely that students have a detailed and accurate long-term memory
Yeah.
of all the mental activity.
Yeah, you're not going to remember every time you sat down to study.
No.
Yeah.
So instead of actually remembering,
Yeah.
they're making inferences
Right.
and they're probably reconstructing their memories
Yeah.
based on their own theories about how they learned.
Right. Kind of filling in the blanks.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there's a lot of research suggesting that people have very limited conscious access
Right.
to the underlying processes of their own thinking and behavior.
We think we know why we do things, but we don't always really.
Right. We come up with stories.
Yeah. Now, I know we talked about the Conway and Ross study before.
Yeah, that's a classic study.
How does that illustrate this point?
So in that study,
Yeah.
students were randomly assigned
Okay.
either to participate in a study skills program
Okay.
or to a control group where they didn't get the program,
Right.
and before and after.
Yeah.
They were asked to rate their own study skills.
Okay.
What Conway and Ross found was that students who did the program
Yeah.
rated their initial study skills
Okay.
as being much worse
Okay.
than they had actually rated them before the program started.
So they were rewriting history.
Exactly. They were reconstructing their memory
Yeah.
to fit this idea that they had improved,
Yeah.
even though their actual academic performance wasn't any better.
Right. So there was no real change.
Right. They just thought there was.
But they kind of convinced themselves.
Yeah. And it shows just how unreliable
Yeah.
our own memories of our processes can be.
Yeah. We tell ourselves stories
Exactly.
to make sense of things.
Yeah.
Even if they're not true.
And while it's true that asking students to report on their thinking while they're learning can also influence how they think,
Right.
the key takeaway here
Yeah.
is that relying on retrospective questionnaires to understand student learning
Right.
has some inherent limitations. And the challenge is to find ways of asking questions that can tap back into that original psychological context of learning,
Yeah.
rather than just relying on potentially biased recollections.
Got it. So this has been a really interesting and at times kind of a sobering look
Yeah.
at how we try to understand how students learn.
Right.
What are some of the key takeaways?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that while questionnaires like the ASI and the SPQ do have some positive features,
Okay.
there are some significant concerns.
Okay.
So on the positive side, they do seem to be reasonably stable over time,
Okay.
and there's at least some evidence that they relate to other measures of learning.
Right.
But the internal consistency of many of the scales is not so great.
Right. Some parts are good, some parts are not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how well they actually measure the intended learning approaches,
Right.
particularly those broader orientations,
Yeah.
has been pretty disappointing.
So again, that construct validity issue.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's not just about the statistical stuff, right?
Yeah.
No. Like, we also have to think about how relevant these questionnaires are today,
Absolutely.
given that they were developed in a very different time.
Yeah. I mean, the student body is so different now.
Yeah.
And the whole higher ed landscape has changed.
Right.
And we have to think about whether these questionnaires work across different cultural groups
Yeah.
and how much response bias
Right.
might be influencing the results.
Right. And the biggest thing of all
Yeah.
is, can we really trust students to accurately report on their own learning tendencies?
Right.
And it seems like the answer is not necessarily.
That's right.
Yeah.
And even though there have been attempts to update these questionnaires.
Right, like new versions.